Hello, and welcome to our webinar for the State of Data Culture Maturity Report, which was hot off the press, released yesterday. My name's Julie Smith, and I'll be giving you a little more background to myself shortly, alongside our two guests who are joining me on this webinar today. And we're bringing you an author and somebody who I've recently christened an industry commentator as well, plus someone who is truly at the coalface of data. But firstly, what do we have in store for you today? Okay, we're going to start off with introductions to our speakers, followed by an overview of the research report, which is what's generated this webinar and the interest that's being shown around the research that's taken place. We're then going to take a deep dive into some of the key takeaways from the report, which you can actually download the report from our website at alation.com, and there should be a link appearing in chat any minute now that you can use to download it for yourselves there. And during the review of the results, the panelists and I are going to be having a little chat and some questions and answers around the pertinent points that have come out of this information. There will be a opportunity for Q&A. If you use the Q&A panel inside your Zoom window, you can submit questions. Some of them might be addressed during the webinar while we're chatting, and then at the end we're going to put some time aside for us to go through them in a bit more detail. Apologies if we don't get through them all, but please feel free to inquire and ask whatever it is you feel you'd like to know more about. So that's enough for me from the introduction side of things. So let's talk a little bit about the guest I have here. So I'll go last. Billy, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Billy Tilson. I've been in data for over 20 years. Had a lot of it in doing consulting, so lucky enough to see lots of different companies, architectures, cultures. And, recently now I'm at GoDaddy for the past 5 years as a data architect and really focusing on data governance.
Thank you very much, Billy. And Jonathan?
Hi, good morning, Julie. It's fantastic to be here. Great to be part of this important webinar discussing a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been a technology leader for almost 30 years, and data has been a common theme throughout that. And today, more than ever, it's even bigger and more important in driving success in all types of organizations. At heart, I'm an educator. I love to help people be successful. Doing that helps me too. I write, I teach, and I run a small consulting firm here in Silicon Valley. So great to be here.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And myself, I am Julie Smith. I'm Director of Data and Analytics at Alation. And I've been here for just over 2 years now, but it seems only yesterday I was actually a customer of Alation, using it to seek out the nuggets of data to drive my decisions as part of the organizations I belong to. I've been in the data world for more years than I care to mention, but I've seen numerous environments from working in consultancy and also directly inside organizations, and certainly data governance has been a strong theme in more recent years around that. So thank you very much for your introductions. So with that in mind, we'll get underway and talk a little bit more about our topic at hand, which is the culture report. So just to give you a little bit of background, it has been revealed in popular culture at the moment that apparently in people's thoughts on a daily basis is the Roman Empire. I'm afraid this has passed me by. But as far as looking at ancient cultures go, what is forefront of Alation's mind, and has been for some time, is data culture. That's what preys on our minds on a frequently, at times a day basis. And we've long recognised the crucial role of people and the culture they build to the success of data efforts. And back in 2020, this resulted in our first State of Data Culture research, which has continued since, and this is the latest iteration of the results being published this week. So in this particular edition, we've aligned with the newly formatted Alation Data Culture Maturity Model, which you may have attended webinars on a little earlier this year. And as such, it uses a framework of 4 key areas within which data culture may be assessed. And our survey tried to mirror this in the way that it approached the research and the results. So the 4 different areas were data search and discovery, data leadership, data governance, and also data literacy. And so we're going to be looking into those different areas on this call today. And this survey used this structure for the response of almost 300 global data leaders from around the world not Alation customers, I might add, so there's no bias there around their use of data catalogs, to see how data culture is looking for them at the moment. But before we delve too deeply into the results of the research, I'd like to pose a question to our panelists, which is, data culture. We're hearing it much more these days. Obviously we've been publishing a report for a number of years, but what does data culture mean to each of you, and why do you feel it has this current prominence that seems to be growing? And perhaps if I can ask Jonathan to go in there first.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Julie. Sorry, I was distracted. I was thinking about the Roman Empire. That's funny. When I was writing my book about data governance, I was researching for a couple of years on that before I wrote it. And this topic of data culture came up more than I thought. And I got really deep into it. But I asked the question at the very beginning, what is culture? I mean, that was the question I needed answering. I mean, we sort of understand these words, but when we're asked what they actually mean, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult. And I want to quote Marvin Bower. He's the guy who helped create, the billion-dollar organization McKinsey & Co. And his saying around this was, culture is the way we do things around here, right? Culture is about behavior. It's about what organizations do every day. And you can identify it pretty quickly when you enter an organization. I mean, we all know what it's like when you enter an Apple store. It's different, right? It has a culture to it. I was thinking about the company Bombas, the company that decided back in 2013 they were going to make socks. And for every pair of socks they would produce, they would give one pair away. And over the last 10 years, they've given 75 million pairs of socks away, while also earning about $100 million in revenue. That's their culture. That's how they behave. They believe social impact and social positive things is very important to them. So when we talk about data culture, it's how we behave around the notion of data. And more specifically, data culture is how we overtly demonstrate the value of data in our organization. And you can see this every single day. And I'm sure we're going to talk about examples of that during the time we have together today.
Yeah, you use the term overtly there, which is we're not quiet about it. We're not we're not secretive about it. It is clear to everybody that the way we feel around data. Thank you for that. Interesting about the socks as well. Billy, any thoughts around that?
It's funny because I remember, as an engineer, I always want to solve the problems, right? I'm usually more like, trying to find technical solutions and architecture. And what I found through my career is actually the technology side is actually not that hard. The people side is much, much harder. And that's where you get around culture. And then I started getting more and more into, it doesn't matter so much about the policies and different technology we're using, but more about how people feel about data. One of the key things I do every year is I survey all the data users, in our data lake and all our various basically data ecosystem, and get their feeling. How do they feel about the data they're using, right? Like, do you trust it? Is it easy to find? And that is actually a much better indicator than anything than versus just pure usage. Is get the people's sentiment about it, right? And in a lot of it, you get a culture of mistrust. And I've seen this at different companies. Everything's being double checked. Everything gets questioned versus when people love their data and bring it to the meeting, and that's how you win arguments is with data. That's when you have kind of a very rich data culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something I've when I've done presentations otherwise, I quite often ask the audience, what are the barriers to your success? And as you say, they're never technical ones. It's always comes down to people, and the people are what build the culture. So yeah, fascinating, sir. Thank you.
I wanted to add, if I could, Julie, just one additional comment to this good intro, which is we should recognize that every organization has a data culture. Every organization, and that could be just like how you protect data or how you store it, how you use it. The real question at the heart of all of this is, does your data culture result in high performance, in good results? And I think we need to keep that in mind as we talk about this topic. So I just wanted to share that.
No, that you're quite right. I mean, well, everybody's got a level of culture in any context of culture, but it's where it is having its effect and the impact it's having completely.
Yeah, I'll also add on to that. As far as such a great topic, we're going to interrupt a lot, Julie, I feel like. But one of the interesting CDOs that I talked to, because everyone has a culture, and it's how curated is it, and how, because it takes a lot of time to craft it. And I met one CDO that always talked about her data first culture. That was her tagline, data first. And I know everyone who works in data for a while, you often feel that data last culture, right? That, there's a launch, and all of a sudden, after the launch, everyone's like, okay, now show me how's it going? And no one says, well, we didn't think about data about this, right? We just thought about the feature that we're launching. But so thinking data up front and data first is a particular culture that I thought was really fascinating and a great way to approach it.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you talk about data first. I know before now, in analytics roles in particular, the phrase feeling like you're at the end of the food chain in terms of receiving end of things was the way that it was meant to feel. And so putting data first, as you say, is the step in the right, that firm step in the right direction to get us there. So lots to discuss on data culture. And I feel we probably could spend the whole hour just talking about the definitions and what's involved in that. But as we dive in to the different parts of the report, hopefully quite a bit more of this will come out. So just going into sort of how we first looked at this, and this is the data search and discovery area. Essentially, data search and discovery to us is the ability for people to find the data they need to answer those business questions that are keeping them awake at night. And do they have facilities to do that? Are they left to their own devices or otherwise? And this is something very close to Alation's heart, because that is the foundation upon which our tool set was originally developed. So asking how widely the company's adopted data search and discoveries, we find that that it's not very well adopted at all. We see only over half have had very limited use of search and discovery tools. Diving into some of the takeaways on this, with some more questions about it, is that we saw that this lack of use of search and discovery and the ability to track things down and understand the data also yielded a lack of confidence in the data. And those with more search capabilities in their organizations were actually 3 times more likely to say they're confident in the data they find. And that also correlated with the leadership and the strong data goals within the organization. So Billy, in the context of data search and discovery, what strategies have you implemented to try and ensure that this capability is there for the staff at GoDaddy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously having comprehensive catalog is key, right? So making sure you have everything a single central place, because data goes everywhere, and I don't care how strict your architecture is, you're going to get data coming into various places. It's not all going to be centralized. You're always on a journey, right? And so being able to catalog data where it's at is very important. So I think that's one of the key things, is make sure that we have an inventory of everything. Then the second thing is curating that data, building that metadata. But also one of the, I think, key things is, and I always kind of talk about this in my talks to my teams, is not all data is created equal. That we do want to we are very targeted in their curation and say, hey, this is the data that is most valuable. This is where we prioritize, and this we're going to make sure that is right. And so we don't attack. We don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to get everything. It's actually, okay, everyone said, hey, bring your data, let's catalog, inventory it so it's all discoverable. But hey, the real rich data that we're going to document, that we're going to encourage people to use, we actually have a data tiering process where say, hey, if it's valuable, if it's used for these use cases, like anything that's customer facing, any feeds our machine learning models. All right, that's a first class citizen. We're going to have it has to meet all these guidelines in terms of documentation, tagging. We organize in domains. That's the other thing, is we also spend a lot of time. Everything in the lake gets reviewed by my governance team in terms of naming conventions, and make sure that we're using the right terms, right? You wouldn't believe how many times people try to reuse the same thing, and it means completely different things. So making sure that we're really crisp on the naming conventions and where things go in terms of schemas all helps the discoverability. One of the major sins I've seen about data swamps is people think, okay, let's just dump the data and we'll organize it later. We'll figure it out later. That's usually too late, right? So you need to actually, when it comes in, because data is sticky. Once it's out there and gets used, it's very hard to get people off it. It's often year journeys. So you need to make sure when it comes in, let's make sure you spend a bit of time. And this is not like weeks or anything. This slows down people by maybe an hour, maybe a few hours of just saying, hey, is this the right name? hey, is there a better way to name this? All right, where does it belong? And you just take that time to spend that, you save yourselves thousands of hours of effort later when you can't find anything or don't know what things mean or have conflicting terms.
Yeah, it's almost the same approach I try and instill with my daughters when it comes to tidying their bedrooms. Just do it every day, a little bit at a time, and then you won't have to worry about it and spend hours. If you can make it part, sort of muscle memory almost with people, that when this happens, we document it, we put it in place so that other people can benefit from that.
I wish I was that disciplined. I spent all my organization on data. And,
well, I wish my daughters responded to that encouragement, but never mind. It's a whole different level of governance. So, I mean, Jonathan, there is this sort of there's a word about data democracy and providing access to data, and we're giving people the ability to discover the data so readily, but balancing that with data security and privacy and all of those elements as well. How do you go about that? How do you address that when you're bringing the masses of data in to try and sift through it and make things available?
Yeah, such an important question. And before I fully answer it, let's reflect a little bit on the data you've collected here on these survey results. I mean, the fact that only 18% feel confident in discovering data or discover data, that's a sobering number right there, right?
Yeah.
Work is required ahead of us. I'm glad you started this survey and this conversation on the topic of search, because if you can't find the data you want and be confident in it, does anything else matter? At that point, you can't make decisions. You can't drive the business outcomes you want with that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, those organizations that are pursuing this, and it's an increasing number, they are implementing tools and processes. But at the same time, as you rightly ask in your question, greater access, greater amounts of data obviously increases the possibility of some security questions. And I'm not going to go into, and I think we have a great audience today. People know about cybersecurity, and I think that topic has become a lot more serious and a lot more prioritized. But here's the one bit of advice, one thing I'm seeing across organizations all over the world of all types. I ask this question to executives when I'm teaching. I sometimes will ask, do you have owners of data sets that are important to you? Do you have data owners? And often they'll kind of look down in a little bit of embarrassment. We didn't think of that, or that hasn't been a priority for a lot of organizations. So here's what I would say is, for the data sets that matter, and this is sort of like risk-based in that not every data set is as important as the other one, right? There's going to be a set of really core data sets that are important to you, maybe your customer list, right? Or your current price list or something like that. And for each of those, do you have somebody who comes into work every day and worries about them? Do they worry about, is that data set current? Is it high quality? Because after all, this topic is all about data quality. Is it available to the right people and not available to the other people who shouldn't access it? If we don't have somebody who worries about it, it's sort of like it's drifting out there, and we've elevated the risks. So my core recommendation on this to take away is, for the data sets that matter, if you want to balance accessibility and quality with the elevated risks that come with that, assign responsible data owners, and I think you'll start to see some results.
Right. Okay, interesting. But yeah, whenever I think of this topic, I can't help but think of you too, and I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Was quite often the answer to many a person, many a data analyst. But there we go. Gone are those days now. We've got a much better grip and tool sets available to us with this type of thing. So yeah, search and discovery, absolutely key, and interesting to see that, having that confidence in your data, if you've got those tool sets that are revealing to you the metadata, the lineage, and the items like that, then you can feel so much more confident around it. So moving on to sort of the next area in governance, and something that sort of made me sit up and pay attention on this is, data governance has been around almost as long as the Roman Empire. It feels like it as a concept. And yet when we look at the figures, there's only 26% of the organizations have got a widespread data governance program in here, with only a majority seeing it in a small part of their organization. But having said that, when we actually asked the questions around there, the follow-on question, we saw that 70% were committing to strengthen their data governance program within the next year. So people who've actually already built it, only 25%, but now there's a huge focus from those other organizations. Jonathan, do you think that the perception of data governance has changed over recent times and might be driving this commitment?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. This has become a much more respected topic. It's a topic which is certainly top of mind for the CIO and the CTO, and it's entering the boardroom too, because at the end of the day, managing your data, governing it well, developing and fostering a data culture is a sort of a C-suite responsibility and leadership competency. It's a responsibility throughout the organization, but leadership has to drive this. Now, we know the answer to your question is yes, this is a much more urgent topic because of what leaders are telling us all over the world in all types of organizations. One data point I find very interesting is, when CEOs are asked what type of organization are they trying to build in the 21st century, their answer is, about 83% say they want a data-driven organization. So they already appreciate the fact that in most organizations, data is the most important asset, most valuable asset. But the sort of the results are sobering. Right now, only about 30% of organizations are achieving, their goals to be a data-driven organization. So when I was doing my research for my book and getting deep into this topic, what I heard was, and what I saw was leaders who want to elevate this topic, but are prepared to invest. And that's a key thing. They're ready to buy tools. They're ready to make this a much higher priority. My final point is there's a real connection with the times we live in and data governance. So, I say there's three types of organizations today. There's you're either an organization that is planning a digital transformation, you're doing a digital transformation, or you've just done a digital transformation, right? Because this is the changing landscape of what it means to build and run an organization today. And you would say, well, that's excellent. Businesses are being thoughtful and thinking about the future, but the question is, are they being successful? Well, that's actually that answer is not as pleasant or as positive as one might think. They're not being as successful as they would like with their digital transformation efforts, although they're all in some state of doing it. And the question is, well, why not? What's holding them back? It turns out, fundamentally, it's data culture primarily, right? The absence of a strong, positive, effective data culture is the single most reason why data transformation doesn't work. And embedded in that, what drives that data culture that you need is data governance. So leaders, for the very first time, are saying, we want to succeed with digital transformation because that is our future. What do we need to do that? Well, we need a data culture that's supported by strong data governance efforts.
Yeah, I think that something I'm certainly seeing as well is the way data governance is being spoken about. And previously it's the compliance and the regulations, and we're fending off fines, as I put it. Whereas now, as you say, people are recognizing it as a vital, pivotal part of data transformation and the business value that gets driven out of that, and seeing those sides of things. And Billy, in terms of your experiences at GoDaddy and other areas as well, what the key components that you have in your data governance and how those foster a data-driven culture, you're able to articulate some of those for us in your world.
Yeah, I mean, just going on with this, I mean, the cool thing now is data is sexy now. Like, it's a hot topic. Everyone has Gen AI is the top of all business leaders are thinking about it, how to leverage it. Machine learning has already been at a peak, and behind all that is data. So it's a major advantage, and people now talk about data is now the most important asset that companies have. It's not necessarily even their P&L. It's the data behind it. And so this is actually GoDaddy was the first organization where we implemented data governance as an offensive kind of program. Like, this is not defensive anymore. Before, my past, governance kind of spawned out of SOX compliance, right? Oh man, I'm missing it. But privacy laws, all these other things that are driving it because of legal and compliance issues. But at GoDaddy, we actually built it off of, hey, we want to be smarter with our data. We want to be more efficient. We're using this as a value add. This is something that brings value to the business. We had in our first survey I did, under 50% of the people work with data, trusted the data that they that they consumed, right? And so since then, we've been able to bring that over to 80%, but that's a journey. And then what builds that is governance. So people now, it's no longer a dirty word. Now it's actually something that people seek out, and I've actually have various pockets of the organization reach out and say, hey, we need governance help. We're struggling here. And then, so it's actually become a really cool position to be and sought out of versus something that you had to get around, right? And people who should roll their eyes, oh no, go through governance. Now people see the value of it, and it makes data something that you struggle with to something that's easy to consume and use.
Fantastic. And that's another quote for me to tell my daughters about what the area that mum works in. It's an incredibly sexy area.
Sexy, yeah.
So fantastic. I love it. But I think you're right. Yeah, it's really, really changed, and it's on trend with people being in data governance and the power of what it can do. And I think you mentioned about AI itself, with these new technologies emerging, I think that's going to probably shape data culture in a slightly different way for those types of things. Any thoughts around that, Billy, as well?
Well, the cool thing, and I saw in a Q&A, talking about, hey, how do you prioritize all the generation and metadata? One cool thing that we're doing with Gen AI, I know Alation is too, is generating metadata for Gen AI, right? With the large language models, you can now get, you're reducing the time to produce a lot of this documentation, and it's easier to keep it fresh. So a cool way that we're leveraging, this is just to maintain the data about our data. And then, of course, I've done tons of ML, especially at Amazon. We were very ML dependent, but it's also very tricky because it can go wrong so quickly. So making sure that you do understand the dangers is that as much as incredible as this, our new AI technology is, it's all dependent on the data. It's only as smart as the data that you give them to train on. And data is biased. There's all sorts of weirdness in data, and you can mislead if you're not smart enough to say, hey, we need to make sure that this tells the entire story. So not only is data really important for the input of the AI, though, but we can also leverage it to help us make better decisions, find defects, all these other things that we can leverage AI to make our data better.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the AI is both helping data governance in that search for metadata, etc., but also in return, data governance has got to make sure that AI can do what it promises in the right way.
Right.
And on that bedrock of data has not changed, no matter what we're looking at, big data, AI, whatever's come through over the years. We're seeing that need for it as well. Cool. So going on to sort of our third area of the report, it was about data leadership. It's often explained how data culture or any culture needs to be enforced from the top down. And we can see the majority here have at least a moderate strength of leadership, but just a quarter feel that the leadership in their organization is actually quite strong. And looking when we sort of dived into the wider results, those with that strong leadership were twice as likely to outperform their revenue goals. Now, if that's not a compelling story around one that people will pay attention to, around how this can impact and how this can help an organization, then I'm not sure what is. But Jonathan, when we talk about data leadership, are we purely talking about your CDOs, your CDAOs, your choose a combination of letters, O's? Who should we be looking towards for this? Is it purely in that area, or are we thinking wider?
Yeah, and this is actually a failure point for a lot of these data governance initiatives and related. It's worth mentioning, in that data point in your previous slide about 23% or so of organizations having a data governance program, what it doesn't say is how effective it is, right? Now, you could have one and it's doing okay. You can have one that's doing really, really well. So there's a great big difference there. In addition, it turns out that about 90% of organizations fail at the first attempt at data governance. It's very hard, and you need help and you need the right tools to get it right. It's not a project, right, where you implement it and then it's done. It's a program that needs constant care and feeding, and it's going to be part of how you operate your business going forward. So getting back to the question of leadership, one of the things I discovered in my research and talking to different leaders and organizations of all types, again, is they thought that data management, data governance was the responsibility of the IT folks. And, if a question came up about data quality or data usage, they could refer the person to the chief information officer, chief data officer. That's a mistake. That's a mistake right there. The responsibility and leadership for data is everybody's, first of all, but a lot of emphasis is placed on the C-suite. Now, I'm going to be talking about the top down. I think maybe Billy will talk about a little bit of bottom up as well, because there are important roles for everybody in the organization. But the leaders of businesses, one thing I discovered being a leader in many different organizations is people watch you all the time. They will, they know, when you go to the restroom or if you're at your desk, it's just a matter, it's just reality. And so exhibiting good behavior, exhibiting behavior around data, how you use it in your meetings, how you use it in your presentations, how you ask for it during all types of business activities, demonstrates your level of interest as a leader and what you believe its value in all types of business activities. So that's really important. The second thing for leaders is to connect data to the business goals, right, and connect it to purpose. One thing that we see when data governance programs begin to roll out is if the staff, if the rank and file don't see value to it, they're not going to buy in, and over time they will lose interest. You've got to reinforce the value, how it's being used, how it is driving, good results. And the final thing I would say, because there's a lot to say about this topic, but just to be brief, showing data leadership it is about all the different ways that data can be part of the conversation and can be part of the efforts to drive, whatever the mission and vision of the business is too. But you should expect as a leader that your people will step up to that this is very important for the success of the business. So it needs to be baked into the feedback process. And I'm saying this is where leaders give feedback to their staff on a regular basis. Now, once a year, annual performance reviews, not a great actual process. We've learned that actually can be quite negative. You want to give feedback pretty constantly as a leader. So people know that they're doing the right thing. They're aligned with the mission. They're aligned with leadership, and you're getting the results that you want.
Fantastic. And although I have to say your description there of being watched constantly has raised all sorts of privacy issues that I wasn't expecting to go towards in this chat. But thank you, Jonathan. Billy, I mean, I know when we've chatted before, you've got a firm belief around the bottom-up approach as opposed to the top-down when it comes to data culture. Any thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, you really need both, right? You need buy-in from top leadership first and foremost. But what I've found, and it's funny because I saw the same thing jump out. 23%, have kind of wide data governance. But I'm pretty sure that's because that's not that the other 75% didn't try. Usually, everyone's tried, and it's like, how successful are you rolling it out? And most data governance programs, I'm sure as this audience is aware, fail. What I found is, just trying to top down drive it doesn't always work. It actually works a lot well when you have the top leadership buy-in, but then you start with the ground up, right? Start at the grassroots level, find a project, find an area that needs help, and you can show value. Kind of back to what Jonathan was saying, showing value is really important, right? Making sure that people view it in the right light, that it's not governance as people usually perceive it. It's actually, hey, we're getting some big help with our data, right? And people produce bad data not because they don't want to. It's usually they don't have the guidance, right? They don't know what the guardrails are. They don't know what good data looks like, and what are the different quality checks I need to do? What are the different reporting I need to do on it, right? So it's having that as a helpful guide, but you need to prove it out, and you need to get people talking about data at the grassroots level because they're the people that work. And what really helps with a really good culture, or at least what I'm always target, is strong data ownership. And like Jonathan said, it's not someone's responsibility over here or there. It's actually everyone's responsibility. And this is where strong leadership really helps, is that making people accountable for their data, right? So it's not just, oh, okay, it's the analytics team and the data's bad, and let's shame them. It's, the bad data doesn't start with one person. It's through the whole pipeline. There's a supply chain of data, and you really need to get it right at the beginning, though, because it's very hard to fix it down the line, and then no one always benefits from it. So you need to get everyone involved and say, hey, I have some accountability, produce good data, and if I don't, then like I get raised and I will fix it, right? I'm accountable to fix my data. So again, like it takes both directions. If you forget either one, it will fall apart. But I've always seen that, especially to build a great data governance program, you can't boil the ocean. You have to start small, and it will naturally expand. And focus on things that need help. I'm sure everyone that is going to be needs good data. Let's focus on that. Let's get really curate that data that will power that. People say, "Wow, I need that in my area," and then then you'll start building this excitement around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what you were saying there about, having worked with analytics teams for a number of years, you feel like they shoot the messenger, because we're the people who tell people, here's what the report says, and when it's wrong, it's it's that reaction, and it needs to be so much higher up the chain. And I think there's the thing, like what I talk about is setting us up for success. You set yourselves up for success with data right at the start of its time. But you made another point in there about people understanding what is good data and what they should be looking for. And I, bless you for bringing us on to our last of our 4 quadrants of the review, which is data literacy, that understanding, or how I see it around data. And when we look at this, over half of respondents had minimal adoption of any form of data literacy program across their organizations, which is, when we look at some later results we're going to see, is quite surprising. And when we looked at related responses, more than a third, around 36% of organizations with strong data literacy, that actually seemed to drive confidence in the data that they were discovering and using. And yet only, if they had weak data literacy, it was only 8% of confidence in their data. So again, a bit like we started with data culture, what does data literacy mean to you? Billy, data literacy is another one of those terms that can take many, many shapes, but what do you feel are the key attributes it has?
Yeah, it's tough to define and measure, and that's something that my organization is really focused on, because we've spent a lot of time in the first few years is leveling up our data, building trust, and having different tiers. But then it doesn't do much good if we build all this great data and no one's using it or knows where to find it, or or really, and it's both places, right? It's the business users and everything, but also our data producers, and if they don't know how to meet this criteria and what are their roles and responsibilities. So this past year, we've launched this big data literacy program to really educate outside of, our data engineers and BAs are pretty literate. That's their job. But the people outside that don't work every day, how do we educate them and start, rolling out classes? And so the major measure of our literacy is who is using the assets that data governance, right? Who's leveraging the high tier data, right? All these little indicators give us an idea of, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Are we getting more literate? Who is familiar as a data producer? Do you know how to handle PI appropriately? So we have kind of various levels of how we measure it, but really the way I think about it is data literacy. It's kind of 2 aspects of consuming and producing data. Do I know how to produce great data? And then how do I know where to find and leverage that great data, right? And then there's, it's something that we haven't found the perfect metric for it, but we survey once a year, so it gives an idea of what people's comfort level is. And then we also do throughout every month, we're looking at our activity in terms of who's looking at what assets that we produce. If we're getting more and more different, especially unique people across different organizations, okay, we're moving in the right direction. Our literacy is going up.
So Billy, I was hooked on a lot of that because data literacy is something I'm fascinated by. I'm afraid during that you did start to sound a little bit like an AI bot. I think your your sound on your web was going a little bit there, but might want to try and then if it carries on, maybe switch off video, but we'll see, because I don't want people to miss any of the words you have to say. But I think it's interesting there you say about it's not just about the consumers and the consumption of data, it's the production of the data as well. And I think it's that shifting that up the chain and getting that understanding of the influence and what that can have downstream.
Yeah, I'm sure this audience will relate, but you wouldn't believe how many software engineers I talk to that's producing data, and I ask them, okay, what for this data set, what's the primary key? Like, oh, we don't have one. I'm like, well, that's that makes the data unusable, right? And you need to educate people. So it's actually incredibly interesting about, especially the modern day engineers. A lot of them don't know much about data modeling or like what is data. So you really need to start at fundamentals about, hey, this is the things that we need to make this data usable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bread and butter set of skills that perhaps are no longer, probably because they're not sexy, or they weren't. but
it's not just sexy, but also like it's also with the NoSQL databases and stuff. It's been really useful for software engineers and being very agile, but also loses a lot of these data modeling principles are no longer can kind of be hidden from it. And so overall, you do have a logical data model that governs this, but they just don't know it, and that you kind of lose those fundamental skills. With that, NoSQL doesn't mean NoSQL. It means not only SQL, right? People forget about that. That's still relational data structures, and it's still vitally important.
Thank you, Billy. So, I mean, Billy's spoken there, Jonathan, about the program of data literacy they've got around there. And I think something that's perhaps, I don't know if you'd agree, is important to realise is that it's not one size fits all with data literacy, or would you disagree?
Yeah, I'd actually expand it quite a lot. I loved Billy's answer a lot, but I want to even expand it even further. I mean, data literacy is, first of all, it's a core competency in business today. And isn't getting the focus it needs. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is there's the non-technical side of data literacy as well as the technical. The non-technical things are like the ability to conduct good research, or to communicate using data, or just to understand the data that is part of your domain, whatever it is that you do in your work. On the technical side, there's things like analysis and visualization and programming, things like the ability to write in Python or R or in SQL. So it is quite a broad topic that isn't getting the attention, as you can see from some of the data points you have in your report. Let's again even dumb it down further. Data literacy is the ability to use a spreadsheet, right? There's a Twitter account that I follow that has sort of Excel tips that comes out a few times a day, and some of you are probably familiar with something similar or the same thing. And it blows me away, actually, the capabilities within Microsoft Excel, the formulas you can write, and the AI that's already part of it. So I'm kind of embarrassed because I've been using Excel for several decades, and I still probably only know 5% of it. That's a data literacy issue. But in organizations today, people need to know how to build reports. They have to know how to interpret reports. And a growing skill in the data literacy space is something called data storytelling, as you know about, right? Actually making a case for something, bringing forward data with other evidence, visualizations, and saying, here is the underlying evidence for a data-driven decision. And as Billy said earlier in his points, it's very hard to argue with good quality data, that's in the right context. And so you can usually move forward with your decisions if you are very good at this type of communication, this type of literacy. So I think, in addition to all types of learning, I'd like to see organizations put data literacy, in there as a priority, and to spend the money on their people, to give them time. Because another data point that comes up in your survey is the excuse people give that they're not as data literate as they would like to be is they don't have time to learn it. And I'm not a big fan of that excuse. What's the price of not having knowledge? it's much greater than the price of paying for acquiring it. So really, really important topic. I love this one in particular, and I'd like to see organizations step up their game in their data literacy.
Yeah, indeed. And I think one of the things sort of struck my thoughts there was how you were talking about the communicating. Often when I talk to, if I'm at shows or exhibitions or whatever, when you get students coming up who are studying data science and they ask for advice, and one of the pieces of advice I give them is learn how to communicate your results. Don't think that people think the way you do. You need to understand how they think and what level they're at in terms of that, and you can bring them on with you if you do it. And I tell you what, we're really coming up with all sorts of insights here, and it's fantastic. And I'm just conscious we want to get to the end of some more of this. And we mentioned here about priorities and what are we looking at, what are the strategic goals that people are going for in the survey, and we asked them to rank the goals that they have, and we put them in order here on the slide, as you can see. And top there is business value creation. I don't think that's probably a surprise to anybody, but looking further down, AI is in last place. If we were to look at how much press coverage these things got, I think it might be the other way around. But creating a data culture is second to last there. Do the priorities that we see here in terms of data governance, data literacy training we see there in the second half, do they mirror your own experiences and objectives, or are we seeing something different coming through here? And Billy, any thoughts? Is Billy frozen?
I think so.
I thought maybe you hadn't heard me. Jonathan, would you like to dive in there then if Billy's...
Yeah, I think what's happening, Billy's got a bad internet connection. I think that's what it comes down to. Hopefully you can resolve that. I was really struck by this slide.
Go ahead.
You know what? Let me, Billy, are you ready? Please go ahead.
I'm not sure if my audio is fixed yet, but so go ahead, John. Go first, and then I'll go first, and I'll see if my audio gets better.
Okay, I'll be real brief then. Really succinct. This was one of the slides and one of the revelations in the report that struck me a lot. And I've been thinking about it. One of the things I think I've sort of interpreted is, the fact that business value creation is number one, it doesn't surprise me. And that seems like, what do leaders want from their data and analytics strategy? Like, what do you want? And then when you look at the others, they're a lot like, how do you get there? So in a way, these kind of answer a couple of different questions. I wonder if the question was asked differently, you might get a different result. Finally, the data culture, the fact that it's second to last there, I think I'd like to maybe ask the survey respondents a slightly different question, because I think everyone would agree, if you have a good data culture and given the evidence for it, that will ultimately drive more business value. The data is pretty strong on this. Again, to reference McKinsey, I don't know why I have that coming up a couple of times today, but decent global organization. Organizations that have a good, strong data culture actually have 20% higher, revenue results. Let me be very specific. They outperform, in terms of revenue, their competitors by 20%. And so it's really clear that you have to have one to have the other. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think you do. And maybe people's perspectives will be different around that. Billy, I think hopefully we've got you back online there. Do you want to put your opinion on this, on these comparisons?
Yeah, I think we all kind of agree here. Justin's right. Like, when you create great data culture, all this comes for free with that, right? So it is kind of interesting, about how this was, maybe the question was asked, but yeah, I feel like if we create data culture, then you do have a strong data governance program, and you have data literacy training, right? You have all these other things, self-service analytics, like all this is part of it's creating that data culture. So it's just sort of a prompt to accomplish all these things.
I wonder sometimes whether the priorities are sometimes driven because people are not necessarily selling it to the business, selling what you're doing, and they have to put the priority as business value creation. And as much as data culture is something that we know, and McKinsey and the data that you quote there, Jonathan, proves out how valuable it can have. It's not something that people are aware of and realize that the time and effort put into that has these other benefits much wider. But
I think also, Julie, if there's it's very hard to measure culture, right? It's like, it's how you do things, and there's indicators, but some of these other things are easier to measure, and that's sometimes why you make that a top priority goal.
Absolutely. Thanks, Billy. So, I mean, something else that this sort of led on to was, alongside those goals, with the business value creation, data governance and compliance high up there, the challenges they felt they faced were metadata deficiency, knowledge centralization, and so on. Do these challenges look familiar? Is it it's interesting to me there that we've got insufficient user skills and training are at 51%, and yet that was lower down in the priority scale. So do we think that data culture is the answer to some of these, Jonathan?
Well, I think the evidence is absolutely clear. Once you recognize and prioritize the fostering of a data culture, and you understand what that means, and then you have leaders who align their data efforts with their business vision and mission, you get better results. The evidence is clear on that. I mean, it's in the double digit, benefits, 20, 30, 40% in terms of growth and revenue and competitiveness. It's clear. So when I look at these reasons, on why they are prioritizing, which makes sense, I probably, you could say, a lot of the effort to focus on data culture and data governance in particular is to reduce risk. But a leader looks at, a CEO looks at the value creation, the growth into different markets and increasing revenue, which if they do it right, they can get the results. And then in an equivalent way, I do think there's probably a very long list of reasons why they're challenged and not there yet. That probably go beyond these, but these don't surprise me, and I think there are areas that you will see benefits if you focus on these.
The one thing that surprises me about this list is quality is not out there. Usually that's the top, and maybe it's because my local.
Oh.
But that's usually our top data, or like, hey, we don't, the data is not complete.
Yeah.
And so that's surprising.
Yeah, data quality not being in there, indeed. I'm very, very conscious we've got some questions that have come in on the Q&A, so I want to get to those. So just one last thought around this. I mean, coming to the end of this, in this whole idea of measuring data culture in those 4 different ways and the way we have in our framework now. But one last thought around this is that someone spoke about it, about, it's not a project. This is a program. This is ongoing. And how do we sustain a data culture? How do we make this something that's sticking and carries on with us? Billy, I'd like to go to you first, because I know this is something you're obviously living and breathing at the moment, and hopefully your sound will comply. Any thoughts around this?
Sorry, what was the question, Julie? I lost you for a second.
Okay, I was talking about sustaining data culture and how some people think it's a project, but actually it's a program, and we have to keep that going. And I know that's something you're living at the moment. So I wondered if you had any techniques or advice for people on that.
Yeah, I mean, build it as part of your everyday process, right? Data governance now is worked into, and it's part of every single project they have. So, hey, okay, now these use cases, then we have to make sure we get this level of tiering. And so it's okay, we have to follow these guidelines. We're building into a lot of our tools now that a lot of the criteria that governance has passed built into our data tools. That lineage is required. You have to give us lineage, right, as part of our new, kind of criteria. So building it as part of your everyday process. And another key thing, which you have a chance to talk to before, was what helps a lot with our literacy is go to the people, right? Like we have academy and we have classes people can take, and it's been successful. But I found really good is to go to people's everyday meetings, I'll go there and just give a 10-minute talk about governance and just to raise the awareness. And so make that part of, everyone's day-to-day thoughts.
Thank you, Billy. And unfortunately, we did lose you a little bit there, but I think people got that. It's muscle memory. It's part of your everyday life that you live and breathe as you're working through things. So we have got some time left for the Q&A. I know there's one on here. Jonathan, someone's excited about your McKinsey citation. Could you perhaps give the details, and we can mention them here now, or pass them on to somebody?
Maybe what we can do is, I have it, of course. We can put it in the notes when this is published.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll do that one. So a few other questions have come in as we've been talking, and I will just prick it onto the main screen on this one. So someone's asking here, in my industry, data governance, maturity, etc., seems to have become exhaustive topics with leadership. There is a hesitation to commit to the resources and journey needed due to numerous failed attempts over the past 2 decades. Do you have guidance on how to energize decision makers to commit, ways to link investment in data maturity, data governance, etc., to attain goals? So it sounds there like somebody that's not their first rodeo in terms of data governance. They've been burnt. How do they overcome that to get success the next time?
I'm happy to quickly jump in on that. I love that, and I'm sorry to hear that you haven't had success with it, but your example isn't that rare. Unfortunately, we hear too much of that. What I have seen in terms of how do you address that, number one is start really small. I just go for one data set in one department, or a process in one area of your business. So start small, get some results. The important thing with data governance in particular, it has to be sized right. You don't apply the same rigor of data governance for a startup than you do for, a Fortune 500 company. So be really clear about how you size it, and define the goals really clearly. What are you trying to do? And so finally, when you do it, I say start small, get some successes behind you, then grow it. When you do that, communicate, share, say, we did this and we got this result. And employees want to do the right thing. Staff want to do the right thing. If they see that their efforts are getting results, all of us are more inclined to go along for the ride. So try those things.
Fantastic. There's another one here to talk about, which came in a bit earlier on. The creation of metadata, definitions, business rules for each critical attribute is so time consuming and requiring inputs from so many different teams. The senior leadership always worry about the ROI of doing so much work. How do we address this? I think one thing is the use of AI to actually generate a lot of this stuff is becoming more of a thing. Certainly we're promoting that in our own Ali AI product. But Billy, any thoughts around that as well? Any other tips about justifying the effort put in on that process?
Yeah, it comes down to merciless prioritization, right? Like, don't, we kind of said this a few times, start small, right? Like, let's target the most critical or even just a particular initiative, right? Like right now, for instance, we're focusing on renewals. So we are, that is a top priority for our company. So we are focusing our data governance efforts on renewals and say, okay, what are the key renewal data sets? Let's show value there, right? Let's make that accomplishment. Let's be part of that success of that initiative. So, be targeted on it. Don't try to say, hey, we're going to define everything. Sometimes, people will come to us with, we have a terminology process and say, hey, I want to define this. I want to define this. We're like, well, why? Like, we really want to focus on what terms are causing problems. Where's their ambiguity? That's where we show value. Our value is not to have an encyclopedia of everything in the world. That's too time consuming, and most of it's intuitive, right? We're trying to get the stuff that's not intuitive and kind of the weirdness.
Thank you very much, Billy. Well, look, we're overrunning in time. We've had so much to talk about, but I'd like to take a moment to thank both Jonathan and Billy for participating in this webinar and commenting on this research results. For those of you attending, there will be a recording going out to you where we'll try and give any other great insights that we haven't been able to answer on the questions now. If you want to download the report, you will find it on our website, alation.com. There was the link earlier on in the chat there. But thank you so much for your time. I hope everybody has a fantastic Wednesday. Take care.